Hello and welcome to yet another edition of News18 presents Yuva Bharat in association with IIMUN, the international movement of students to unite nations, led by Rishabh Shah into its 10th year. Its president, Rishabh Shah, has been a perennial presence on this effort. And it's thanks to him that we are curating a very august panel and also some young minds to discuss something which should be top of mind for all of us. Should we as a nation bow down to Omicron, this latest variant, non-lethal, nothing more than a cold, a common cold, that's what many people say. But the hysteria around it, the anxiety around it, and everybody working their brains and thinking, are we heading towards another lockdown? And the impact of all of this, especially at a time where we as a nation have vaccinated 130 crore people, or 130 crore doses have been administered. So that's the question that is top of mind. So we're going to take that forward. Rishabh, take it away.
Firstly, thank you, Anand, for being able to do this, because I know that as a news channel, to dedicate 30 minutes of a show time just to discuss issues which are essentially related to young people is something that is difficult to come by. And therefore, I must commend both you and the channel for doing something like this. Today, with us, of course, we have Naveen Kunduji, who is the Managing Director for AB Cash and also the Chairman for the Domestic Tourism Commission of FICCI. So thank you for joining us, Naveenji. We are also joined by Dr. Harish Shetty, who is a prominent psychiatrist and somebody who does not need any introduction. Shravanti joins us, who is the first year MBBS student from Hyderabad, and to talk about school education, one of my favorite academicians across the country, Rupa Chakrabarti, Director, Sun City Schools. Let me come first to you, ma'am, and ask you this. Like Anand beautifully set this up for us, 1.3 billion jabs, and yet the question remains whether or not to open schools. I'm all for the safety and the precaution, but at the end of the day, when you've got almost 2.5 years of a pandemic that have gone by without any formal education as such taking place, don't you think it's high time that students return back to schools and everything is normalized?
Thank you, Rishabh, for holding this particular topic and having this congregation of people. I'm privileged to be here. You know what? We've still not forgotten those days where we lost loved ones. And our children are the most precious people in our lives. The 1.3 that you talk about are not those children who have been vaccinated. These children have not been vaccinated. The 5 to 18. And that's where the fear comes from. Of course, I agree that in colleges, it is definitely possible for students to go back, and colleges are opening up. But I think the fear mainly comes from the memory, which still haunts us, the second wave. And is Omicron going to be worse than what the second wave was? Is a thought that we are all left with. But as the time passes, we understand that the anxiety and stress that we started with is not justified. It's dissipating. But yes, do we bow down to Omicron? On a lighter note, it has the word Om. So I would leave it at that.
But ma'am, just to, not to play devil's advocate, but to ask you this quite honestly and earnestly, because I mean, you interact with young people, and so do I at IIMUN. And when I talk to them at that juncture, there is anxiety to go back to school. And when everything else is normalized, I understand that they have not been vaccinated, but at the same point in time, their fatality rate is also not as high. When everything else is normalized, when people are going to work, so on and so forth, and when everything is normal for the rest of the world, so to say, it's these young people who have been boxed up sitting in Zoom classes. And at the end of the day, let me be honest, ma'am, in your school, probably they don't copy an online examination, but in 9 out of 10 schools and colleges across the country, they're doing that. So what I'm trying to say, ma'am, is don't you think with social distancing measures in place, with things that you have a full stadium of 50,000 people, where you have kids participating in an IPL match, where I've seen young children go to an IPL match who are below 18. They're going to a Sunburn concert. They're going to Dubai for the expo, but they can't come to school. So this is quite baffling in that sense. Don't you think with social distancing measures, this is something that should be started at the earliest?
I absolutely agree with you if you take my personal perspective regarding this. And with this thought, we had all opened up schools, but it seems it has become a kind of habit to shut down schools at the drop of a hat or drop of a coin. Because is it because we are the most easy target or susceptible to anything that is done? And I really am, it's tough for me to understand why this is being done.
The answer is very simple, that it's the most politically potent tinderbox that we are all sitting on. That and it's candid, because as parents, let's see what we do. We will risk our going out to the shop, to the market. We would even go to a pub, have a drink with friends, and also maybe perhaps even go for a meal, have dinner at a restaurant, or go to office. So everybody who's most vulnerable is already up and about. Those who are least vulnerable, those who have had no fatality or as good as negligible fatality across the world to this disease. Even the Delta variant was not so potent. 26 countries plus has Omicron, and not a single case where it is fatality, or even if children have got it, they've not recovered. Most of the times, COVID-19 kids have all recovered within 1.5, 2 days to 3 days. Minimal amount of cases of hospitalization. So you've got all the data in front of you. But it's bacche, it's children. And if there are 400 kids in a school and about 200 of them are found positive, then there is going to be a big hue and cry about it. Despite the fact that all of them recover faster. In fact, there were more children recently, which data never came out, more children recently who had dengue than those who had COVID-19. But they still were ready to send them out, and schools will be open even at that point in time. So this kind of a psyche is something which baffles me too. I'm being very candid here. It baffles me. But the idea is that you have a variant. The moment there is a variant, all the data shows that it is not lethal. And especially if you are vaccinated, it's not lethal. Now the elders are all vaccinated. They have herd immunity. We as a nation have herd immunity. So you cannot go and infect the children. Where everybody wants to get into shutdown mode immediately, not just schools. They'll say travel ban. So again, restaurants band karo, hotels band karo, travel, international flights are not being opened. Somebody in the travel business, Naveen Kundu, I'm amazed that you can still manage a smile, because businesses are suffering.
I mean, people don't know what we've gone through, and a lot of people in the travel and tourism business have been actually pushed down the poverty lane. That there has been a serious consequence of this entire 18 months of COVID that we have faced in the world. The biggest sufferers are not even the people who lost someone. I mean, somebody is lost, it's unfortunate and he's gone. But within the families, people who were already living on meager means, like drivers, guides, people who do transportation services, visa services, they have been all pushed down the poverty lane because there has been retrenchment. There are people on leave without pay, people who are dependent on the outbound travel or the global travel. Nothing is opened up. They are not back. Somebody in domestic tourism is still doing something, but they are not back. And you know what, Anand, what baffles me now, I'll tell you. For every decision, there is a data. When we started COVID, there was no data. Understandable. There are travel bans. You got to shut down the country. You got to do a work from home schedule. You're locking down the complete country. Understandable. But today, where are we? Let's understand some good measures that India took, first of all. And I'll justify this, what I'm trying to say. We didn't have testing. I'm not trying to get bothered, but today, let's start. We did an Arogya Setu app in which we could track people, test people, treat people. And nobody could escape it, because anybody who had symptoms would go for a test, would come on the Arogya Setu app. So that's a good thing we did very well. We developed vaccines, our own vaccines. While there are 8 vaccines available in the world, India has 2 vaccines. Vaccination program through COVID, tracking the way people are vaccinated. Look at the data, 45 crore people in the urban population are completely vaccinated with 2 doses. I'm talking about the urban population. Those who actually spread the infections most, because the infection does not go or penetrate down the rural areas. when we have all this, when we see the parameters, our doctors would not probably know last year what was the protocol of day 1 to day 5 to day 7 to day 15. Today they know all of that. You see less and less doctors getting affected now because of COVID, even if they're treating COVID. Health workers are very well aware. Even your local chemist shop tells you that you need to have a steroid on the day 8 and not before that and all this. So we know a lot about it. Now, when you consider all these factors, what is this human cry about Omicron? And suddenly you have RT-PCRs now back into the place for people to travel. You were about to start international flights on the 15th. What a great news it was for the world. And we had started, not we, the whole country, all the tour operators had started receiving some good bookings. There was a ray of hope. And suddenly you say, no, we are reviewing the decision, and then you block it. What has Omicron done? A mild virus. And I'm saying, let's say we wait 15 more days to get more data on it. But a knee-jerk reaction is very, very lethal on the economy.
True, but the impact is that normalcy, if there is an outbreak somewhere, what will happen? The people who decide to open up will be blamed. At that time, nobody will look at the facts. See, I was shocked when I realized that folk musicians across the country were suffering. Those who had who were dependent on the temple economy, suffering, all sent into penury. And this is something which we don't realize, and that there will be a different social fallout of that. There will be those who will perhaps end their lives, or will be in distress and trauma, or will get into a downward spiral as far as their entire economic situation. They will never be able to emerge out of it, and that is going to be a huge social cost to us as a nation. But nobody is wanting to talk about that right now, Dr. Harish Shetty, because if there is an active caseload and if there is an outbreak which happens, everybody, including me as part of the media, is going to turn around and say, who asked you to open up? So that's where the impact is. There is also the consideration, then the factors. What happens is you have to weigh what is important and what is it that there are multiple industries that are all the ancillary industries, stationery manufacturers, pencil manufacturers, pen manufacturers, so many little uniform manufacturers, and like he said, drivers and all of the others who are dependent on schools, dependent on travel and tours, dependent on so many other industries. They're all suffering, but that suffering does not score over loss of life, outbreak situation, spread of the virus.
So you're asking me, Anand?
Yes.
Let us put the record straight. There is something known as hyperarousal and hypervigilance after a disaster. In 1994, when the earthquake survivors were in a temporary tent, a small sound of a jeep would make them run away, run out of the tent and say, oh, earthquake is happening. After the March 12 blast, Anand, you remember those 28 women who jumped out of the train and got run over. This is hyperarousal and hypervigilance. They felt, somebody said smoke, they felt it was a bomb and they jumped. This is happening now. After the second wave, there's hyperarousal and hypervigilance. Even an ant looks like an elephant. Even a small insect looks like a tiger. So it's not only those who have had loss, but every large number of population, they are anxious. So when they see Omicron, and why did the WHO give it a big name? They could have given B1, B2, C1, C2. So hyperarousal and hypervigilance are the most important factors which we need to take in mind. State governments and central governments are not interested in mental health. There's a mental health pandemic there. Number two, SOPs of schools can open only the locks of the schools. They can't open schools. The way we had phone lines for remdesivir, for oxygen, for beds. You need to have these phone lines for children to call up and say, we are scared. Can you give us some counseling? We need to have these phone lines for all the stakeholders of schools. So SOPs alone do not open schools. You need to actually open hearts and minds with the same initiative, same passion you did for saving lives. The third point, which is very interesting, is a lot of kids who come to me are down and sad. And they say, we want to go back to schools, meet our friends, play with our friends and meet our teachers. And this so-called depression in a large number of children can be resolved with one episode, with the going back to school. The last point is, Rupa, time is not always the best healer. I mean, that's one of the most famous sentences I say all the time. There is a mental health pandemic. The state governments and the central governments don't have mental health professionals in the task force, unfortunately, because we know only that we can save deaths. But those who are dying every day because of anxiety, depression, panic, PTSD, we are not doing anything about it. So we need to spend as much money, spend as much time and facilities to open schools, but you need to provide that infrastructure. Principal can call up the helpline and ask, what is it that we can do for this? Kids can ask, other stakeholders, parents can ask. And at the same time, so many chief ministers are talking to their people every month on Facebook Live or on other lives. No mental health talk at all. What is this? A disaster has consequences, and the mental health consequences last across life.
Shravanti, you please tell me, what did you go through as an MBBS student when you were in lockdown and when now you're back in campus? I'm so happy you're back in campus. What difference did it make for you?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Being a student, I believe that clinical exposure or practical knowledge is very, very necessary. And due to the pandemic, students couldn't attend schools or colleges regularly, which affected their academics. And transmissibility of the variant will definitely affect the students as they are more vulnerable because most of the schools and colleges have started functioning. And I think that the concerned authorities should come up with a suitable and safe solution for everyone. And in case the authorities are planning for a lockdown, as I mentioned, it already affected a lot of students earlier. And if they are coming up with such measures, then all the students should be informed prior to avoid chaos, as a lot of them tend to travel, and authorities should schedule and plan accordingly without compromising students' academics as well as their health, most importantly.
If I may ask you now, Shravanti, before I bring back Rishabh, and I'm sure he has a few questions. Once it was unlocked, lockdown ended, schools were still shut, college was still shut. Were you still sitting at home, or had you started moving around?
I was in the house, sir.
You didn't move out at all. Your parents were going out?
Yes, my parents were going out.
You were having house helps coming to your house?
No, sir. They were restricted.
Courier deliveries, was that happening?
Yeah.
Were you stepping out into your society, meeting your friends, or were you just sitting inside?
No, sir. We weren't allowed.
You weren't allowed. Now, how is this fair, Dr. Shetty, that the parents can go out, but the child will remain locked inside the house?
One thing which is very important, Anand, is that if any school or college has any positive cases, the politicians jump either way. You don't open schools, they'll fight when you don't open schools. I mean, you open schools, they jump at them. So you need strong, determined leadership in the states to have protocols for mental health and for infection, and start it very boldly. You don't have to take populist decisions. And this logic of yours, Anand, is so strong, because more you remain isolated, the worse you get. The more you remain without seeing air, sun, moon, and grass, the worse you get. And long-standing isolation can cause depression, which may be very difficult to recover. And what happens to children? 50% of the mental illness in children starts at the age of 14. So let's not kill the impressionable minds. Let's not block the impressionable minds. All state chief ministers can come together and form a reasonably good SOP for schools.
No, I'm just saying let lay people throw off their mask if they are vaccinated, and if they are going to say that I want to go ahead and live a healthy life, and this one and go ahead and look the disease in the eye. If you fall ill, you recover. Don't shut everything else down. We can't, as a nation right now, afford to get into that space. Is my point of view, especially with a variant which is not lethal.
There are weddings happening everywhere in large numbers. If the outbreak had to happen, it would have happened by now. In the weddings, nobody is wearing masks. And rightly so.
In the IPL, nobody is wearing masks. I'm just echoing that. And just coming to this, Anand, the other part that was mentioned by Naveen ji, and he mentioned it rightly, the economy, when it comes to the transport, travel and tourism, but also simultaneously, the economy when it comes to schools. There are 1.3 million schools, and there are so many school teachers that are dependent, and they are, many of them are sole breadwinners for their families. There are people, the tour and travel sector also caters to schools. So, I mean, there are, like you rightly said, the stationery vendors, the people who are ancillary services to schools, even they are dramatically impacted. So it's not just the mental health, like Dr. Shetty said, it's not just the mental health that is getting affected of 600 million young people.
No, well, the point is, look at Rupaji. The fact is that schools also have physical infrastructure. You have overheads. Now, there are parents who say, if you're going to conduct online, then don't charge so much of fees. So, and then they would say that, no, parents, our lives are we going to teach the kids? Are we going to do our work? And look at the teachers. Each session has to be done, can't be done with more than 4 or 5 children. So you have to do the same class 4 times. If your class strength is about 20 students, and you got to do the same thing. Plus, they have their children. This is like a mental pressure cooker which is happening, which will just explode.
I'm so glad you brought up the fee aspect. I was hesitant, though it's on my points, but I was hesitant. Now that you've opened the the can of worms, I'm so sorry. I think there can be so much that's going to spill out because, see, first and foremost, who are the people who are taking decisions and for whom are they taking decisions? The people who are taking decisions are taking for the masses, not for certain, group of parents or students who are very conscious. I can tell you, having been to 3 cities in the last 10 days, or 15 days, that except for in NCR, and I can talk about Delhi and Gurgaon where I stay, most of the places, nobody was wearing masks. So our focus is kind of getting moved. There's a paradigm shift here. And because, you don't know how to control those masses, you are making everybody suffer. Let me put it this way, suffer is a strong word, but I would like to use the word suffer because there are these children who don't deserve it, like in Gurgaon. People are very conscious. Even the fellow who comes to pick up the garbage is wearing a mask. Even he's conscious because otherwise you pay 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees. So first is who's taking the decision and for whom are they taking the decision? Why are others getting caught in that quagmire of decisions is a question, right? So the answer is call the people, the stakeholders who can take the right decision and which is for everybody. And here the decision should be wear your mask, right? Make sure you're at a distance. And there should be the people who are monitoring who should be more conscious. The second thing is COVID for children, we all know is not happening, right? They are immune for some reason, God's charisma, I guess. UK had only 2 weeks of school shut for the nursery or the creche, whatever you wish to call it. Only 2 weeks. And here, the play schools are the ones which are just not opening and they're not allowing them to open. Now, where is the logic behind this? Is the next question I have. The third is the fee. This is also kind of garnering or pampering the thoughts of certain group, which may be, again, I don't want to call it politically inclined, but I am forced to say that it's politically inclined because the masses who pay the fees, if you can appease them, then there is going to be a lot more, because as soon as they start coming to school, there's going to be a fee structure change, right? So there's not a point that we need to look at. There are multiple points. Sports, let me tell you, the government of Haryana is having its district, its state, because we are very proactive in sports. We've just had day before our district sports championship for the middle year students. So they are doing this. So why not coming to school? You mean to say when they're playing that cricket over there, they are not touching each other. They're far more closer to each other when they're doing, aspects of sports. So I could go on, but these are points I feel somebody really needs to question the concerned people.
With that, I'm going to lay to rest here today on this discussion. Very, very engaging. Thank you very, very much to all our panelists for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Wonderful speaking with all of you. To our viewers, thank you for watching this edition of Yuva Bharat.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.